Welcome to this episode of the Biometrics Leadership Lab podcast. I'm Amanda Cross, and my guest today is Mark O'Brien. Mark is the founder and CEO of Warman O'Brien, a life science recruitment agency. With over 20 years of experience, Mark is expert in helping life science professionals find the right job. A true believer in people-first philosophy, he's adept at making the perfect match for both clients and candidates. Mark first started working in IT recruitment and then realized that life science had niche skill sets that clients were finding difficult to source. And so he evolved to become a specialist in biometrics placements. In 2017, Mark and his wife, Caroline, launched Warman O'Brien. And since then, they have expanded globally and successfully placed candidates in over 25 countries. One of the main reasons for launching their recruitment agency, having the opportunity to combine the industry knowledge of Caroline, who is an experienced statistician, with the recruitment expertise of Mark. When not recruiting, Mark is a fitness enthusiast, having recently completed his first half Ironman. And today we are going to talk about CVs and job interviews. So if you are looking for a new role, this is the episode for you. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure, Amanda. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. Looking forward to discussion. It's something I'm very, very passionate about, whether it be helping with resumes, CVs, interview preparation, and some of the key parts of looking for new roles. So hopefully be a productive podcast.
Yeah. And so just to talk a little bit about what's it been like to go and start your own agency? It's a big risk sometimes to step out on your own.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, have been in this for a long, long time and had built up a lot of expertise within biometrics initially, but had recruited and across globally within a number of other functional areas and managed a wide variety of consultants as well. It has been daunting, exciting in equal measures, challenging initially to get it set up. As you kind of mentioned there, set up with my wife, Caroline. We met at a conference over 20 years ago. She was an industry expert, and I guess I was combining my recruitment knowledge. So that was one of the main reasons why we started the business. And that was initially as a biometrics recruitment consultancy. But since then, we have evolved, expanded into other function areas and recruited a number of experienced consultants, some who I'd worked with previously within clinical, regulatory, medical, and preclinical as well. So it's been exciting and daunting. Obviously with COVID and that, been lots of challenges with managing people and working remotely. But equally, it's been very, very happy with how it's gone, and challenging nonetheless as well, especially with how the market has been in the last, say, 12 or to 18 months. But looks like it's a few green shoots now, and looking forward to 2026.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize until I was working on your bio just how recently you had started, not even at 10 years yet, and
does feel like a long time ago in some ways. I mean, 8 years, coming on 10 years does feel a long time in some respects. But I guess navigating a small company, and then obviously with COVID and that there was certainly challenges with managing people remotely, and as a lot of people had to pivot in some respects. But we successfully navigated that, and built a number of other functional areas, expanded globally. As you kind of mentioned, we do recruit across more than 25 countries. We have a colleague based in New Zealand who recruits, who's involved in our global business development team for the US market as well. So so still quite international, and excited about how it looks for next year.
Yeah, I was thinking it's a lot of reach for kind of a company less than 10 years. So that's well done. All right, so we're going to jump into the conversation. We're going to start with a few essentials on CVs. But, people use the term CV and resume interchangeably. So is there really a difference, and does it matter?
I guess it depends on if you're looking into the US or Europe. Obviously, we recruit globally, so I guess the slight similar differences are, I guess, for US resumes probably a shorter, more concise CV, I guess, if you want to call it that. But I think in what we do within life sciences, I think it's still important to maybe have it maybe 2 or 3 pages rather than a one pager. But I don't think it's matters too differently. I guess I say mention CV in Europe, and then US obviously I just mentioned resume, but I don't think it makes a material difference really.
So what are the 3 must-have sections that people want to see on a candidate's CV?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental one is obviously your professional experience. That's really, really important, but you have to have it, and maybe had it on chronological order as well. So it's important that you list the most recent role you have, and it depends on obviously how how long you've been working within the industry, and how old it's been that you've written a CV as well. So it's important that you put the professional experience at the very, very beginning in chronological order. And the next one I'd probably put would be personal summary. I think that's kind of how you sell yourself and what are your key attributes. And it kind of gives somebody an idea of the type of person they would work with. So it's going about your cultural background as well. So it gets a bit more of a fit, how you fit in within a team as well. So that would be probably the second one. Third one, more likely to be key skills within your resume or CV. So it's important that you list those. You shape it back to what the job description looks like, and making sure that any key skills that you have are mentioned on your resume. Because obviously a lot of internal recruitment teams or talent acquisition teams, a lot of it goes onto the portal or an ATS. And if it's not written on there, then even if you have done it or not done it, if it's not written on there, then it might not get picked up by an ATS. So it's really, really important that you include that as well. So I would start with professional experience, personal summary, and then key skills was probably the main three. Obviously, education is important, probably depending what the client's looking for, whether it be a master's or a PhD. But the top three would be those.
I love that you mentioned write it down, because it's going to go through ATS. I say a lot in a lot of different circumstances in my life. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. And, that goes on your CV too, people. So if you did something spectacular, but it's not on your CV, people are going to see it, and it might not come through an ATS if they're looking for that as a key skill. It's
funny how often people you speak to, and then they say, yeah, I've done it. And then when I look at their resume and say, where is it written in your CV? Oh, I didn't either put in the same key skill, or it's maybe a different, you've worded it differently. But if you're dealing with internal recruitment teams who are maybe not niche within one area, then it might not get picked up. So it's really important that you look at the job description and what you've done within that. Is that written on there? And as I said, if it's not written on there, then it says you haven't done it. And even on the key skills as well, sometimes they'll just put on the key skills, but not really mention it within each role. And then it's very hard to distinguish, okay, well, how much detailed experience you have within Databricks or Java or SAS or what have you. So I think it's important that you do put it in a lot more detail as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the, I was actually going to say, and now I want to take back what I was going to say, but I was going to say that's probably one of the advantages of working with a recruiter who's working on your behalf, because they can give another summary of your experience directly to the hiring manager, and you're not getting lost in some sort of ATS. However, it doesn't matter how glowing of a summary you're providing to a hiring company. If they don't see that experience on the CV, they're going to say, well, where is that on the CV? So I think, you've got to get it on there if you've done it and you're good at it.
I think nowadays, because you've only got 10, 15, 20 seconds to impress somebody, I think if it's not written at the top, then no matter how many pages you've written down on a resume, then the further you go down, then I think you got to capture the key things at the very start of it to gather their attention. Otherwise, they might not even go down to the rest of the CV.
Okay. And so what are 3 things you should never put on your CV?
Ooh, I think probably personal details is probably one. I would just, obviously you're going to have personal information, but there's certain things in certain countries where I guess personal data you don't have to put in as much detail. So for example, it would be marital status, or whether you have children, your date of birth, etc. So some personal information is irrelevant for applying for a job. And obviously in certain countries as well, with anti-discrimination laws, you've got to make sure that it can be, you just put in the basic information that's needed. So contact details, etc., which is probably the most important thing. Are you eligible to work in that country? So that those are the key things. My biggest pet peeve when reviewing candidates is when they're putting job responsibilities, it looks like a job description. So they're not actually giving any detail about what they've done. It's almost like copying and pasting from a job description. I guess a lot of candidates who come from a CRO background, they almost use their company CV rather than actually what they've actually done themselves. And it's very generic. It doesn't tell a true picture of the candidate. And especially when you're speaking to the candidate, they say how great they are and what they do. And then when you look at the CV, it's completely different. They're really kind of underselling themselves. So I guess one of the advantages of working with a recruitment agency is helping them obviously craft a CV, selling themselves, giving more information. What are the USPs, all those kind of things. And I think the more they think about it, the more they realize, actually, yeah, I have done that, or actually, I need to put that on my CV. So a lot of people are quite shy about telling them how great they are, And it's important for us to demonstrate that and making sure that it comes out of themselves rather than just me to tell them on the phone, than actually putting on their CV or resume. So that would be another thing. And I guess the other thing is sometimes they put an objective statement, or they put a very statement about, but it's very generic about what they're looking for. I'm looking for a forward-thinking company, but it's not really saying much. So I think the more important thing is your personal summary about what you've done, your key attributes. That gives a bit more feeling about what a potential employer is looking for in a candidate. So that's probably one of the key things I'd probably put in there as well. So objective statement, probably the personal information that you put in, you don't need to put in everything on there. I guess it's probably more in Europe, you see photos, you see every information possible, and half of it is not relevant to the role. So I guess we're always trying to explain to candidates, particularly in Europe, that you don't need to have that as much information on there. But probably the biggest one would be listing your job responsibilities and it just looking like a job description rather than actually what you've actually done and achieved within the role.
But the other thing is, talking about people trying to sell themselves and highlight their successes. One tip I always like to give people is keep a little notebook of everything you've done where you've really succeeded. It can help you on multiple fronts. It can certainly help you when you're looking for a job and you're spiffing up your CV to look more accomplishment based rather than task based. So you can make a note if you got a database live really fast, you can put that out there. If you cleaned up a site that was really struggling and as a monitor you went in and turned them around, you can put that on there. If you got a bunch of tables out in a really fast timeline, you can put that on there. But anything that spectacular that you've done on your job, keep a log, because eventually someone's going to ask you what you've accomplished and you've kind of got it all there. It's your list of wins. It also will help you in your current job when you're doing those annual self-assessments for how you've done in your role. You've got kind of a log of everything you've accomplished over the year. So that's one way to get that done. And we've kind of just touched on this, what personal details on CVs, but what are the biggest differences between US and Eastern Europe and Western Europe in terms of what's on a CV? And like, I can't believe the first time I saw a CV with a photo on it. I'm like, what is this? But it was somebody, I think, in Germany. So that was their standard.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing you can see, I don't know if it's a company that Europass, and you've got your photo on there, and it's so generic, and there's so much information on there that's the first page is their personal summary and details, and half of it is irrelevant. So, I think that's the specific difference between Europe and the US. The US is very succinct. There's not a lot of that information on there, but that's fine. It's not needed. And obviously, there are some strict discrimination laws in the US, which is understandable. But I guess if you even look from GDPR purposes in Europe, you got to be careful how much sensitive information you put on there. If you're talking about race or religion or your sexual orientation, etc. So it's important that you don't need to put half of the information on there. And it's just, the guidance that we would give them is basically to keep it as minimal as possible. Keep the key things about contact information, location, eligibility to work in that certain country. That would be the key things for me.
So do you think that the I don't want to say requirement. That's what I'm struggling over. I don't think it's a requirement, but do you think that it's shifting a little bit in Europe to become maybe more like America in terms of what's going on to CVs? Because, even 10 years ago, a European CV would have a lot of personal details on there, like how old they were, how many kids they had. And I think, do you think that the new standard in Europe is much more Americanized with don't put the personal stuff on there?
Definitely getting closer than that. I still think there's a lot of people that are a bit more old school and they just put it out there. They don't think anything different. But I just think we're more conscious and make it, particularly with GDPR purposes, that you don't need to put on that sensitive information. And it's going to make sure that there's no biasness within an interview situation. So we've got to be careful at what information is put on there. So when we're speaking to candidates, particularly in Europe, we obviously mention that, listen, all that information does need to be on there. So some people are just happy to keep it on there, and others are okay, well, they take more heed in our advice and actually tweak it slightly. So, but I think the key thing within the US is less is better in some respects, particularly in the US. But as long as you have the key information, that's going to be the thing. And the most important thing is they're not hiding anything on their CV or resume. That's the one thing that when we're looking at the candidates, and are they a genuine candidate? Are they
Okay, so if someone is looking for a new role and they haven't looked in, 10 plus years, how should they approach updating their CV to fit the requirements of today's market?
I think probably not rehash their old CV. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes, is the fact you're just kind of covering all ground. It's very bullet point. You're not updating the bullet points. It's almost like start from scratch again. In some ways, it's probably better, and actually focus more on some of the achievements, accomplishments that you mentioned as well. So I think that's where probably it's easier to just fall into the trap about just updating your old resume rather than actually thinking more about, okay, well, most recent position, what you've been doing, and what was your role, what have you achieved within that role or accomplished. That'd be the key things I'd focus on, rather than a lot of the old school CVs are very much job responsibility, etc. So that would be probably the biggest thing I'd look for, is rather than updating your CV, is almost like starting from scratch, and actually the most recent roles and responsibilities there, make sure that's up to date, and obviously the key achievements within it.
All right, shifting a little bit to interviews. What do you think are some of the biggest shifts in interviews post-COVID?
Certainly Teams interviews, Zoom interviews, that's very, very much common. And I think that's accelerating the interview process. So that's a positive in many respects. But I think what candidates need to make sure that they are fully prepared for the interview as well, because it's a quicker process and first impressions as well. So if you don't have first good half an hour, 45 minutes, then that is gone. Whereas normally you tend to have a first call with a hiring manager for 30 minutes, and then you have a face-to-face interview, and that's where you can show your key skills. Whereas now, if you don't pass your first interview stage, 30, 45 minutes, then you've lost it before you even started. So it's important that you're fully prepared going into the first interview, because it's going to be on Teams. It's less likely to be face-to-face with remote working these days. So it's important you make a good impression. I think interviews are a bit more structured now. I don't think they seem to be as much as formal as maybe before. So there's probably less chatty. So it's important that you focus on obviously what answers you're going to give, giving specific examples. That's going to be key things when you have an interview, because as I said, you might only have 30, 45 minutes. And obviously on the video camera, ensure that everything is working. You've done jumped on 10, 15 minutes beforehand, and there's no background noise. All the small details, whether you have to have headphones, depending on if you're in an office environment or you're working from home. So it's important that you do test it before you have it. So they'd be the key things I'd be thinking of.
Yeah, I really like the tip about get on the call 10 minutes before it starts, because if there's a problem with your tech and you need to reboot that computer, you don't want to be doing that when the interview is scheduled to start. Yeah.
So, I mean, when we do interview preparation, so we do kind of give them feedback about either if we can hear them or not. So I think that's something helps them, reassures them, so that when they do go on the call, they're fully prepared. So I think that's one advantage of using a recruitment agency, is the fact that you're doing a number of Teams calls before either you send them to a hiring manager, and also then when they do get an interview request, that you do jump on a Teams call with them, just to get everything checked before they actually jump on it. So a lot of candidates really appreciate just that attention to detail and information that we can help them as well, and it reassures them as well. For example, you get a lot of candidates who haven't interviewed for 5, 10, 15 years sometimes. They've never applied to a job. They've never written their CV, and it can be quite daunting. So it's almost reassuring that, listen, you've done it many times before. You have done it before. You have the experience. It's just a matter of going through the interview preparation with the recruitment consultant, for example. So, and that makes it much easier for them as well.
Yeah, I think it's really different. If you think pre-COVID, doing interviews, you'd bring somebody on site and they would sit there for half the day and they'd meet with a bunch of people, and we'd give a little technical assessment, and that's the day. And so in some ways it moves much faster now, because it's easier to schedule. You don't have to coordinate everybody to a single day. But on the other hand, you might be doing more calls over that same time period. Also, I've struggled with how you do a technical assessment of somebody on a virtual call. We have successfully come up with several ways to do that, and they have been fruitful, but it's a totally different look and feel. What are red flags that people should be aware of on interviews from both sides? Like what is a candidate going to do that's going to be an immediately red flag for the client, and what can a client say or do that should be a red flag?
I think the first thing, if it's definitely a Teams call you're going to have, then you get the odd person who don't put on the camera, and that's an immediate kind of a red flag. And I think, as I mentioned to you earlier about the fraudulent candidates, that's something that comes up quite frequently. In the fact that if they're not willing to put on their video, then that's an immediate red flag in my perspective. Probably the other thing is focusing on looking at your answers being very vague and not focusing on you rather than we, for example. So I think that would be the key thing is I did X, Y, and Z rather than what we did. Probably another thing to look at is trying to be, if people are asking why did you leave your previous role, not being negative about previous employers. Yeah, obviously we have a difference of opinion and there's different reasons why people leave businesses, but I think it might have the opposite of what you expect if you start talking about being negative about previous employers. So that's one thing that we when we're prepping candidates, that's one thing to look at as well. I guess the other thing is when you're presenting when a hiring manager is talking through your CV and they're talking through what you've done, what you've achieved, and then they're asking you what you've actually given examples, and if you can back up those examples of what you've done, then you got to make sure that you truly believe in what you've written down in your CV is accurate and correct. And I think that's just a lot that sometimes can be just laziness rather than actually I've not done it. So I think that comes down to how much interview preparation you do and how really keen you are on the role. So the more interview preparation you do, the better chance you're going to get the role. So that would be the key thing I would do to make sure that you read through your resume again and tick all the boxes of what you do, how does it compare against the job description, and just give some highlights, writing some examples, so that when you are in the interview that you can back up with specific examples, because it might be a small point within either a key skill or personal summary, but if you can't give specific examples, then that'd be questionable from the hiring manager perspective as well. So that would be I kind of mentioned about unable to explain your key achievements, key skills. That would be probably one thing I'd look at as well. So most important thing is making sure you give some specific examples of whether it be achievement or a key skill. That would be probably the main things I would focus on from a red flag perspective.
But work-life balance is important, and you want to ask about it. And this comes up a lot because my background is so CRO heavy, which can be really, really busy. A lot. But as a candidate, how do you ask about workload without sounding like you don't want to work hard or that you won't work hard, right? So how do you ask that all important work-life balance question?
Probably one thing to look at is maybe how do teams ensure quality delivery in tight timelines? It's probably a good open question to ask. How do companies prioritize in their workload when something is urgent? It shows that you care and that you understand that things are busy, because the reality is if you're working maybe in a CRO, there's going to be tight deadlines, it's going to get busy, there's going to be times where you're going to have to work late, for example. So yeah, probably understanding how you prioritize work. And also when hiring managers are interviewing anyway, those questions will come up. So it's important that you have specific answers for that, because if you're applying for a role within the CRO primarily, then there's going to be tight deadlines. There's going to be making sure you deliver within those deadlines as well. And you got to understand that, there might be workload that going above beyond what you're currently doing. So it's important that you show urgency within it, but also the fact that you care as well. So those would be the kind of key questions I would ask. How do you ensure the quality is delivered within tight timelines, and more around how do you prioritize work when something is urgent?
And I think if you're interviewing at a CRO, I mean, it just goes without saying that there's going to be times when timelines are really tight and you're going to be pushing to get something out the door, high quality, on time. And, just ask how that's approached, like how do you resource that during that? As a hiring manager, you might want to preempt that a little bit, because I think it goes a long way. And just saying, when you have a time like that, we always try and make it up with some comp time or some extra time off, or, how you are helping and a candidate see that extra effort maybe required sometimes, and here's how you try and compensate for that to give an overall balance to it.
I think if you say it up front as well, I think there's nothing worse than not expecting it, and when there is expected overtime, it's like, well, it's not in my contract, or I'm 9 to 5, and then it's like, well, that's not the reality, and yeah, that's when it becomes a bit more challenging when you have certain expectations and yeah, they're not being followed through. So I guess you're just going to go back over previous companies and what they've done within those previous companies, how they worked within tight timelines as well. So that's where you just got to make sure you're being honest as much as you can, but know the expectation could be that you are working a bit later than others than sometimes. And then obviously if you're based in Europe as well, if you're working with global teams, then is the expectation to work early mornings when you're working with Asia, or vice versa if you're working with US teams, what's the expectation about working after 5 o'clock, for example? So, and does that come up often?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions to ask, like, what does such and such look like in practice? What does working on a global team look like in practice? How does resourcing look like in practice when 3 projects are colliding? And the question that you're going to ask is a little bit dependent on what level of role you're interviewing for and what the expectation might be, but the resourcing is a great strategy. So I like that one, Mark, a lot. Okay, so here we are moving into some practical tips and tricks for navigating your CV and your job interview, and a little bit of LinkedIn too, I think. Is a 1-page CV ever acceptable?
Yeah, I get asked it a lot, and my personal opinion is I think it's probably too short. I think you're underselling yourself if you just have a 1-pager. I think, yes, it might be a nice summary, but the reality is you want to be showcasing your skill set. You want to be showcasing your level of experience. You want to be showcasing not just your professional experience, but your key skills, your personal summary, etc. So, and education, and then it's more about your hobbies and interests as well. Any publications, anything with regards conferences attending, those kind of things as well. So I think that would be very hard to put in a one pager. Someone asked me, okay, well, is 2 pages too much? And I was like, well, actually, I think it's probably even too short as well. But it depends on what role you're applying for also. So I think, yeah, at least 2 pages, probably 3. And it just depends on, obviously, publications. You can put publications on request rather than having lists of pages about what you've actually done.
That's kind of like how much is too much. And I think if you are very well published, or if you are presenting at 6 conferences a year, a selection of items to go on your CV with a full accounting available upon request is probably the way to go. I've seen 25-page CVs, 20 of which were publications, and that's good to know. I would argue may not be necessary for the roles that we place.
It's the same with references. I mean, a lot of people put references on there and full details, and that's not necessary to put it on there in the first instance. Yes, it's important if you've got gaps in your CVs, etc., that you can explain why there are gaps. But ultimately, it's the most important thing is that keep it simple at the beginning.
Somebody's first job, 1 page enough if they're like just starting to.
Yeah, I guess but normally I think I like to look at, 1.5 pages maybe. 1 page seems too short, but I think it's more about what you've done, whether within university, any other bits and pieces you've done with work experience across multiple things, and then obviously what you've achieved within university, but also anything you presented, you've been involved in working as well. So 1 page, it's okay, but I think the more detail about how you present yourself, personal summary, those kind of things will obviously help, and obviously education also. So there's still enough that you can put in there to make it slightly bigger than 1 page, because you might feel like you're underselling yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times you're in some roles where you've been promoted to something, a lot of people tend to put in this, they rewrite the same responsibilities, the same responsibility rewritten, and it's like that's not really as relevant. So you can obviously make it a bit shorter, but rather than repeating yourself the whole time. So, and I would probably just focus more on your most recent experience rather than, if you're, say, a very quite experienced person, that I wouldn't worry about too much what happened a long time ago. Summarize it, but focus more on maybe the last 5 to 8 years rather than what you did previous to that.
Should CVs be tailored for every application?
I mean, in an ideal world, yes, but the reality is, it depending how many roles you're applying to. If you're applying to lots of roles, and that can be quite time consuming. I guess you would probably have a general kind of generic CV. I don't like to hate the word generic in some respects, but I think having a general CV, but also you can tweak it slightly depending what the job is, because each role is slightly different. So you don't have to change it massively. But I think the key thing is looking at each job description, and depending what the company is looking for, then you tweak it slightly to what your CV looks like. So it doesn't need to take that long to keep changing it, but it shows that you genuine interest in the company, genuine interest in the role, why you're applying for that specific role. You've done your research. Those are the key things, because you want to try and stand out from the crowd. If you're applying to a role and there's lots and lots of candidates applying for the same role, then that's probably one thing that would maybe can stand out, rather than just sending your CV to lots of different jobs. So I think it's understanding what role you're applying to. If you're speaking to a recruitment agency, how many other applications have been put forward for that role? Then you kind of get an idea, okay, well, what is the competition? So then hopefully the agency will tell you, yeah, you probably need to tweak it slightly or tailor it a bit more to what the company's looking for. So that might give you make it unique for yourself.
I agree. I like to think about what is it in the job description that makes you say, oh, I'm perfectly qualified for this, I'm going to apply. And then whatever those skills that are in the job description that you're saying, I'm perfectly qualified, make sure those are showing in your CV really clearly, and make sure that you're using words that they've used in the job description. One, because you want to show that you've done what they're looking for. And two, if it's going blind into an ATS, you can be sure that those are keywords set up. And so you want to be sure that your CV is making it through.
You get a lot of talent acquisition people are managing tons and tons of roles, hundreds of roles. They're not specialists in one area. So yeah, if you're not tailoring it, then that could be the difference between getting an interview or not. So, and that's the challenge about working directly with a company on a portal or ATS. Then it can go down the rabbit hole, and you don't even know if your CV or resume is getting through to a hire manager, for example. So yeah, that could be the difference if you tailor it.
Does formatting and design matter?
Yes. And the reason why is because there's many of our clients currently and previously who've rejected CVs based on the format of the CV, how it's designed, how it looks. Because the way it's formatted sometimes could be the difference between shows the reflection of the quality of your work. So if it's badly written, formatted, gaps, spelling mistakes, grammar, if you haven't done the broad research and checking of your resume, then that's a reflection of the work you're doing, the quality of the work you're doing. So we try and not format the CVs ourselves. It's almost, we go back to Canada and go, listen, your CV will be rejected based on what you've given us. I think you need to go back and redo your CV, spell checking everything as well, looking at what the job description looks like as well. So yeah, and I get, depending which area you're looking, whether you're within IT, data science, those kind of areas where they're techie kind of CV, formatting CVs, it can be quite bewildering how much information is on there in a very short one pager. And I think that's how it can be quite clunky as well. So you've got to be cautious about how the reflection of what that looks like on a resume. Maybe you need to reword it to put on a 2-pager rather than trying to put everything on one page. I think that's where definitely more on the data analytics, data scientist type of people, they tend to try and put everything on one page, and it can be a bit bewildering. Where's everything? There's no certain format, and it's very hard to navigate it. So
what about overly formatted with multiple colors and fonts and like, I think that's, a block of something on this side? And
that's basically what I said. I mean, because you're trying to put it maybe on one pager to try and put everything on there, and it's just too bewildering. It's not easy to see. It's not easy to navigate. There's too many colors and too many tables across every part of the resume. And it can be the difference between getting through to a hiring manager and that. So I think it's important that you try and reflect on what it looks like and how maybe you view it against maybe a recruitment agency. So it's always important to get feedback, whether it be a talent acquisition recruitment agency, to give an idea what that looks like, and maybe if you need to tweak it slightly or not.
How should employment gaps be presented on CVs?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Obviously, there has been a lot of layoffs and redundancies in the last couple of years. So I think you got to be honest as much as you can. And more often than not, you get found out at some point down the interview process. So it's important to be upfront, to be as honest as you can initially. There's a lot of different ways you can present it. If there's a gap in your CV, whether it be a sabbatical, it could be maybe a career break, parental leave, or what have you, or even redundancy. It's important that you just keep it simple. You don't have to put in that much detail on why. That's more for the interview to explain a bit more detail about why there's a gap in your CV. But more often than not, if you start tweaking, whether it be the month you started and just putting in the year, and then there's a difference, a gap in the year, but there's no reason, there's no explanation why, that means you're trying to hide something, and there's a reason why you've left that particular company. So I think it's important that you try and be as upfront, as honest as you can, clearly, and explain why on the resume, but just keep it simple, whether it be sabbatical, redundancy, relocation, layoff, etc., and parental leave. So if you just keep it like that, you don't have to go into too much detail beyond that.
So are you saying it's better to actually go ahead and put the times on there and say that you were unemployed for whatever reason, rather than just have this missing time period on your CV?
If it's longer than 3 months, yeah. If it's shorter than that, then I don't think you need to. Obviously, you finish a role and you're going to take the summer off or what have you. It can take time to get a new role, but anything beyond maybe 3 months, I think you've got to put in a specific reason why there's been a gap within it, and that's something that you just explain to the recruitment agency about why that is, and then you back it up. And I think that I do like, when I'm speaking to candidates, is if there's a big gap in their resume or a CV, is have they got references as well? It's important that either have those references ready to share with the recruitment agency, and it shows that you're not hiding anything. If you're backing yourself to be suitable for a particular role, and having references from previous employers, that really kind of helps you, gives more comfort to both the recruitment agency, but also to the end client, that actually, yeah, there's a genuine reason why there was a gap in their CV, whether it be redundancy or what have you, confirming that they are who they are, the dates of employment are correct, and also if they've been highly recommended, and if they're suitable for that role. Also, what we tend to do is, when we're mentioning to candidates, or sorry, we're going to check, reference checking is when we're speaking to them, we're actually explaining to them what the role they're applying to, and almost checking if they think they'd be suitable for that role. And it's quite reassuring that when we go to the potential employer, when we're sending a resume, we can explain there's gaps, but also having references to back it up and say, listen, we've contacted this reference and that reference. Here's a LinkedIn profile. I can confirm that they mentioned that they could be suitable for that role based on X, Y, and Z. So it really kind of gives comfort to both the candidate and also to ourselves that we've done our background checks on certain candidates, and also we think they're suitable. The reason why we think they're suitable, even though there's a gap in their CV.
So if you're going straight to a company without going through an agency, is it worthwhile to put a cover letter in to talk about these things? How much transparent should you be on your CV? Or are you just kind of, I'm going to use probably it's an American phrase, but are you just stuck behind the 8 ball? Are you just...
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think if you can be as honest as you can, depending on how much information you want to put in the cover sheet. But I think, yes, on the CV, you just put in sabbatical, or etc. And if there's a specific reason or it's a specific length of time that you've been sabbatical, then yeah, maybe on a cover sheet, and if it's genuine reason, and maybe you can list the references on there that to back it up, or linked, having a LinkedIn profile and they're still present in that company, then that gives some reassurance that actually I'm not hiding anything. There was a specific reason why I left that company, or why haven't been working for so long, and it just gives them reassurance as well. So yes, concise information on the CV, and adding some information on the cover sheet explaining why, because yeah, not everyone would work maybe through a recruitment agency, or they're applying directly, and yeah, it's hard to get beyond an ATS, so it's important that you kind of be a bit more clear on what and why.
Yeah, gaps are hard, and I say this as someone who has a resume, a CV, I guess, that is lengthy and also has multiple gaps on it for various reasons. And I so personally, because of my background and my gaps don't bother me as long as somebody can explain why they had the gap and what they were doing and what the issue was. I mean, it happens to everybody. There can be a million reasons for them. I've seen other people who are like, oh, there's a gap. They must be a horrible person if they weren't continuously employed, and therefore I don't want to even interview them, which is discouraging to the person with the gaps. However, I think kind of says maybe that's not the place for you anyway, as much as you might want a role. So I don't hide mine, but I also have reasons. I've never had anybody question any of my gaps in terms of that wasn't a good reason or how silly it was. So I think not hiding them, knowing clearly why you are on them and what you want to say about them is really the best way forward. And if you're going to find a company that's really bothered by gaps, then maybe a company you don't want to work for.
And would you have it on the cover? Would you like to have it on the cover sheet as well, though, or would you happy to just on a resume on just?
I just see it on the resume, and if I really like the rest of their, this is just me personally, but if I really like the rest of their experience, then if I have an internal recruiter, I'm like, find out about their gap just to get some more information, or I'll just ask them myself at the interview stage. But I don't necessarily need the explanation ahead of time. Those of us with lengthy CVs, how much should you remove your early career experience once you're senior? But also the other question there is, what is senior anyway? Right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I guess it could be longevity within a role within the industry. If you're 10, 15 years experience, then you're definitely going to be senior. So I kind of mentioned it slightly briefly earlier, is the fact that you don't want to completely eliminate it, but you just want to make it very short, concise, of going back 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I think it's more focused on maybe the last 5 to 8 years. That's going to be the key thing, and put a lot more emphasis within that experience. But also, obviously, yeah, you can't completely delete everything else of what you've been doing as well. But keep that short. I think the key thing would be focus more on your current experience, because that's the most relevant thing that you're going to be doing within the role as well. So.
Yeah, I've seen the advice and have done this some with my own CVs. I've pretty much lopped off everything that's not quite 10 to 12 years current and just have this prior experience section, partly because my career goes neatly into those buckets, but also, and I'll just frankly say this, I think you get to be a certain age and it becomes a little bit harder to find a role. And there's a sweet spot of experience, and then there's the level of experience where people are like, oh, they must be old, or, oh, we can't afford them, or, oh, there's too much experience. And so what's really most relevant, I think, is what you've done in the past 10 to 12 years, and where you go from there. Like I personally have also just taken most dates of like education and other non-current roles off my CV. It's a piece of advice that is given to women quite frequently, I would say.
With education and putting the years you did it, yeah, I mean, that's
not having the years on your education, like anything that will date you as a human, like take it off. Yeah. Okay. Is LinkedIn more important than a traditional CV?
Well, I mean, most people tend to be on LinkedIn nowadays, and especially if you're looking for a new role, then clients or companies will question why you're not on LinkedIn, particularly if you're a new role. So I think it's important. I'm not just saying it's more important, but I think it's just as important to have a very detailed LinkedIn profile, and also making sure that matches the CV. We've had many companies over the last couple of years who will look at the resume, they'll check LinkedIn, they'll check if it's neatly matches the resume, and if it doesn't, then they might even reject them. If there's no photo on LinkedIn, there's a question mark straight away about are they hiding something? If it's not verified in LinkedIn, they'll start questioning it. If the dates differ from what is on the CV, so the attention to detail is so important. So I always advise that what you have on your CV, if it's why is it not written on LinkedIn? So there's no reason why you shouldn't put it on there as well. So particularly nowadays, where most people tend to be on LinkedIn, it's easy to verify it yourself now. You can put on recommendations, you can put on references, stuff like that. It really kind of showcases your skill set. If you're active, and you don't have to be necessarily active on LinkedIn all the time, but the more connections you have, you build up your portfolio, you've got a brand, your personal brand, etc. And the more connections you have, you're going to go to conferences as well. That kind of stands you out as well. So I think it's important that to have as much information on LinkedIn to match what's on the resume will go a long way towards getting a new role.
Yeah, I like to see it current, for sure. I think how much you're posting or how active you be, everybody has ins and outs of that. I think if you're at the beginning of your career, it's going to look a little different than if you're, more established in your career. The photo, though, my goodness, get the photo on there. When you talk about fraudulent candidates, and you may be a perfectly non-fraudulent human being, but if you don't have a photo on LinkedIn and you don't turn on your camera during the interview, or you have it on during the interview and then you don't turn it on when you start the job, that's just throwing off so many red flags. So, get the photo on there and be willing to be seen, and that goes a long way. And
making sure you're professional it's a professional photo as well. The amount of people who put on a photo on LinkedIn and it's like, wow, okay, this is a professional forum here. It's not Facebook or another social media platform. So it's important that it's a very respectable photo rather than anything else as well. So it goes a long way. And as I said, first impressions make a big difference.
All right, last question. LinkedIn open to work banner, yes or no?
If you're actively applying for a role, then I see no reason why you wouldn't. If you're not looking for a new role, then yeah, you probably shouldn't put it on there, because ultimately you might get hounded by or contacted by lots of recruitment agencies or companies directly. So and you're just wasting their time as well. So it's only if you're looking for a new role, then I would certainly put that open to work, because you just never know what opportunities are out there. And unless there's a specific company you're applying to and you know somebody working there, then there might be so many other opportunities you weren't aware of. I guess if you're passively looking, it's worth maybe putting on open to work as well, because even if you're not actively looking, you just never know what the right role might look like. So it's important that you keep your options open. So whether you're actively looking or maybe even passively, it might be worth putting open to work as well.
The comment I see on that all the time is it just is a sign of desperation if you have it on there. I don't know.
You get lots of candidates who have it on there. It's like, oh, I found a job 6 months ago. It's like, okay, well, I think you need to take it off, because you just won't ingrain yourself to recruitment agencies if you just keep it open, because you don't want to waste people's time, really.
And there is a way to turn on your open to work so that recruiters can find you without putting the banner on your photo. So you can actually have the best of both worlds. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground. And if anybody would like some specific information on working with an agency or even working with Warman O'Brien, how can they best contact you?
I think the best thing you can obviously share my contact details, but probably the most important thing is go on our website, warmanobrien.com. There's a lot of information on there. You can register to join a newsletter. There's lots of information about writing a CV, downloading a salary guide, interview preparation. There's lots of resources on there to help you with getting your CV set up and obviously interview preparation. Obviously, speaking to a recruiter, one of our recruitment consultants will help as well. And also you can follow us on LinkedIn. I think we've got over 80,000 followers. So there's lots of information there we share and lots of content we share on an ongoing basis as well. So combination of things, reach out to myself directly, go on our website and follow us on LinkedIn.
Great. And I will put some links to all of your contact details in the show notes, but I do want to give a special shout out to the salary survey that you briefly mentioned, because I think it's really important. I've seen several people talking about salaries, and I think salary structures look quite a bit different than they did 4 or 5 years ago. So I think it's worth your time to grab that. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining me today and sharing your insights on jobs and CVs and interviews. I've really appreciated the conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Amanda. Much appreciated, and looking forward to seeing you in the new year.